Humanity's fleet responds to SOS, Galactic silence follows, HFY Sci-Fi Reddit stories. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the navigation center of the Earth defense ship Valkyrie, watching the holographic display show their position in the outer spiral arm of the galaxy. Her task force of 15 human vessels had been conducting routine patrol missions for 4 months, maintaining peace along the trade corridors that connected dozens of different species across known space. The bridge hummed with quiet efficiency. Officers worked at their stations with the focused calm that came from months of working together in the depths of space. The only sounds were the gentle beeping of sensors and the low vibration of the ship's fusion drives. Sarah enjoyed these peaceful moments between missions, when the universe felt infinite and full of possibilities. Lieutenant Jackson Torres sat at the communications array, monitoring the subspace frequencies that connected the galactic community. He was a skilled operator with quick reflexes and an ear for unusual signal patterns. He had been with the fleet for 3 years and had never missed an important transmission. "Commander," Jackson said suddenly, his voice cutting through the bridge's quiet atmosphere, "I'm picking up something unusual on the emergency channel." Sarah moved to his station, studying the waveform patterns on his screen. The signals looked different from standard distress calls, more complex and layered with multiple harmonics. "What makes it unusual?" she asked. "It's not coming from any known species frequency," Jackson replied, his fingers dancing over the controls. "The pattern suggests it's from the hegemony sectors, but that's impossible. No one has heard from them in over 200 years. The hegemony had once been the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, an alliance of ancient species that controlled vast regions of space. They possessed technology far beyond anything other races had achieved, but they had mysteriously withdrawn from galactic affairs 2 centuries ago, sealing their borders and cutting all communication." "Can you enhance the signal?" Sarah asked. Jackson worked for several minutes, applying filters and amplification algorithms to the weak transmission. Slowly, a voice began to emerge from static, multiple voices actually, speaking in languages that hadn't been heard in the galaxy for generations. "Dr. Martinez," Sarah called to the linguistics officer. "We need your expertise." Dr. Elena Martinez was the fleet's specialist in xenolinguistics, a brilliant woman who had spent decades studying the communication patterns of extinct civilizations. She had short gray hair and intense green eyes that seemed to see patterns others missed. Elena hurried to the communication station and began analyzing the transmission. Her expression grew increasingly grave as she worked to decode the ancient languages. "It's definitely from the hegemony worlds," she said after several minutes. "But this isn't a normal transmission. It's a panic broadcast using emergency protocols that were supposed to be used only for civilization-ending threats." "What kind of threats?" Sarah asked. Elena continued working, her translation software struggling with dialects that had evolved in isolation for centuries. "They're describing something they call the void swarm entities that consume entire star systems. According to this transmission, the hegemony has been fighting them for the past 50 years. "That's impossible," said Chief Engineer Miguel Santos, who had joined them from the engine room. Miguel was a stocky man with calloused hands and the kind of practical intelligence that kept starships running in deep space. The hegemony had technology that made them nearly invincible. Their single ships could destroy entire fleets. "What could threaten them?" Elena's face went pale as she decoded more of the transmission. "The message says their core worlds have fallen. Their fleets are destroyed. This is a final distress call from the last surviving outposts." The bridge fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. The hegemony had been legends in the galaxy, being so advanced that other species could barely understand their technology. If something had defeated them, what hope did anyone else have? Another transmission came through, stronger than the first. Elena worked frantically to translate it. "Commander," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "this one is addressed to all species in the galaxy. They're warning everyone that the void swarm is expanding beyond hegemony space." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Expanding where?" "Toward the core worlds, toward Earth. The transmission estimates the swarm will reach inhabited systems within 6 months." Sarah opened a quantum communication channel to Earth Command. The signal would take 3 hours to reach Admiral Catherine Webb, commander of all human military forces. While they waited for a response, more hegemony transmissions came through, each one more desperate than the last. Elena worked to translate them, building a picture of an enemy unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. The Void Swarm wasn't a conventional military force. It was something far worse, a collection of entities that existed partially outside normal space-time. Creatures that fed on the fundamental forces that held matter together. They didn't conquer worlds, they unmade them, reducing entire planets to component atoms before moving on to the next system. "This doesn't make sense," said Lieutenant Commander Alex Kim, the fleet's tactical officer. Alex was a young woman with black hair and sharp analytical skills that made her invaluable in combat situations. "If these things are so powerful, why haven't we detected them before?" Elena found the answer in another transmission. The hegemony was containing them. They built massive barrier systems around the affected regions, keeping the swarm locked in uninhabited sectors. But their defenses are failing. Admiral Webb's response finally came through. Her weathered face appeared on the main screen, showing the stress lines that came from years of military command. Webb was a career officer who had led humanity through several conflicts with hostile species, but she had never faced anything like this. "Commander Chen," she said, "I've reviewed your reports about the hegemony transmissions. This situation is unprecedented. We're mobilizing every available ship, but our analysis suggests we have months at most before these entities reach Earth space." Sarah nodded grimly. "What are your orders, Admiral?" "Proceed to the last known hegemony coordinates. We need intelligence about what we're facing. But be extremely careful. We can't afford to lose your fleet when we might need every ship for Earth's defense." The communication ended, leaving Sarah and her crew to contemplate their mission. They were being sent to investigate an enemy that had destroyed the most powerful civilization in galactic history. The odds of survival seemed impossibly small. "All ships," Sarah announced over the fleet communication system, "set course for hegemony space. Maximum speed." The human fleet turned toward the galactic core, heading into the unknown. As they traveled through hyperspace, Sarah gathered her senior officers to plan their approach. They had no idea what they would find when they reached their destination, but they knew it would be unlike anything they had encountered before. The journey to hegemony space took 18 hours at maximum hyperspace velocity. When the human fleet dropped back into normal space at the edge of the ancient empire's borders, what they saw defied comprehension. The star system before them was wrong in ways that hurt to look at. Space itself seemed twisted and broken, with patches of absolute void floating where planets should have been. "My God," whispered Jackson from his communication station. "The entire system is gone. There's nothing left but empty space." But that wasn't quite accurate. As the human sensors adapted to the strange conditions, they began to detect something moving in the darkness between the stars, shapes that existed only partially in normal space, creatures of living void that consumed light itself. Dr. Martinez was studying the sensor readings when she made a horrifying discovery. "Commander, I'm detecting massive gravitational anomalies throughout this region. It's as if something is systematically deleting matter from existence. The Void Swarm wasn't just destroying civilizations, it was unmaking the fundamental structure of reality itself." As the human fleet moved deeper into the devastated system, they began to encounter debris from hegemony vessels. The wreckage was unlike anything they had seen before, composed of materials that seemed to phase in and out of existence. Some pieces were completely intact, but somehow empty, as if their substance had been drained away. "Commander," called out Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the sensor station, "I'm reading something massive approaching from the system's inner planets." On the main display, a shape began to emerge from the void, something so large it defied easy comprehension. It was a hegemony dreadnought, a ship the size of a small moon, but it was moving erratically. "Are there survivors aboard?" Sarah asked. Elena tried to establish communication with the massive vessel, but the only response was a transmission in ancient hegemony language. As she translated it, her face went white. "It's an automated message," she said. "The ship's AI is broadcasting a warning. The crew is gone, but the AI is trying to complete its final mission. The Dreadnought's message told a story of absolute horror. The Void Swarm had appeared without warning, emerging from what the hegemony called the spaces between spaces. Their conventional weapons had no effect on the entities, which existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Even the hegemony's most advanced technology couldn't touch beings that were only partially present in normal reality. As the human fleet studied the derelict Dreadnought, something began to emerge from the deeper void. Shapes that hurt to look at directly. Entities that seemed to consume the light around them. The Void Swarm had detected the intruders and was coming to investigate. Battle stations, Sarah ordered, though she had no idea how to fight an enemy that existed outside normal space. The first entity reached the human fleet's perimeter. It was impossible to describe accurately a writhing mass of non-existence that seemed to drain color and substance from everything around it. When the human ships opened fire with their plasma cannons, the energy beams simply vanished as they approached the creature, consumed by its presence. "The weapons aren't working," reported Alex Kim from the tactical station. "It's absorbing our energy weapons somehow." Sarah thought quickly. These entities fed on energy and matter, but what if they tried something different? All ships switched to kinetic weapons. Fire solid projectiles only. The human fleet launched a barrage of metal slugs and explosive missiles at the void entity. To everyone's surprise, the physical projectiles seemed to affect it. The creature writhed and contracted as the solid matter struck its form, making sounds that came through space itself, horrible screaming that made the human crews feel sick. But the victory was short-lived. More entities began emerging from the deeper void, dozens of them, moving toward the human fleet. Each one was different, some resembling twisted geometric shapes, others appearing as tears in space itself. "Commander," Elena called out urgently, "the hegemony Dreadnought is transmitting new data. It's tactical information about fighting these things." The ancient AI was sharing everything the hegemony had learned during their long war against the Void Swarm. The entities were vulnerable to certain types of attack, but only under specific conditions. They could be damaged by concentrated gravitational fields, disrupted by exotic matter interactions, and temporarily banished by quantum interference patterns. "Miguel," Sarah called to her chief engineer, "can we modify our weapons to generate gravitational pulses?" "Give me 10 minutes, Miguel replied, already working on the modifications. Around them, the void entities were closing in, moving through space in ways that defied physics. They seemed to teleport short distances, appearing and disappearing as they approached the human ships. The destroyer Phoenix was the first to be attacked. A void entity simply appeared next to the ship and began to drain its hull away atom by atom. The crew reported that their ship was disappearing around them, sections of deck and bulkhead simply ceasing to exist. "This is Captain Rodriguez," came the transmission from the Phoenix. "We're losing structural integrity. The thing is eating our ship." Sarah watched in horror as the destroyer began to dissolve, its crew trapped inside a vessel that was being systematically erased from existence. But Captain Rodriguez and her crew didn't give up. Instead of evacuating, they overloaded their ship's fusion reactor, turning the Phoenix into a massive bomb. The explosion caught the void entity by surprise. The nuclear detonation didn't destroy the creature, but it disrupted its coherence long enough for the human fleet to learn something important. The entities could be affected by sudden, massive energy releases, even if they could absorb steady energy streams. "All ships," Sarah announced, "prepare for close-range nuclear detonations. We're going to use our own ships as weapons." It was a desperate tactic, but the human crews responded without hesitation. They had seen what these entities could do to entire civilizations. If destroying their own ships could slow the swarm's advance toward Earth, they would make that sacrifice. The cruiser Defiant charged directly at a cluster of void entities, its crew working frantically to overload every system on the ship. Captain Thomas Park's voice came over the communication system as his ship accelerated towards certain destruction. "This is for every world these things have consumed," he announced, "and for every world they'll never get the chance to touch." The Defiant exploded in the heart of the void cluster, the nuclear fire disrupting 3 entities simultaneously. Miguel's weapon modifications were working. the human ships began firing gravitational pulse weapons that could actually damage the void entities. The creatures reacted to this new threat by changing their tactics, becoming more aggressive and coordinated in their attacks. "They're learning," observed Dr. Martinez. "These things adapt to our strategies in real time." The battle became a desperate race between human ingenuity and alien adaptation. Every time the human fleet developed a new weapon or tactic, the void entities found ways to counter it. But the humans had one advantage that the hegemony apparently hadn't. They were willing to sacrifice everything to win. As the fight continued, something unexpected happened. The ancient hegemony dreadnought began to move, its automated systems coming online after centuries of dormancy. The massive ship positioned itself between the human fleet and the largest concentration of void entities, its weapons charging for one final battle. The dreadnought's AI sent a final message to the human ships. Elena translated it with tears in her eyes. "We failed to stop them, but perhaps you will succeed where we could not. Use our sacrifice wisely." The ancient ship fired every weapon it possessed, creating a gravitational anomaly that tore a hole in space itself. The void entities were caught in the gravitational distortion, their forms stretching and warping as they were pulled into the artificial black hole. The hegemony dreadnought followed them into the singularity, destroying itself to eliminate dozens of the creatures. The remaining void entities began to retreat, pulling back into the deeper regions of space. But Sarah knew this was only a temporary victory. The main swarm was still out there, still advancing toward inhabited space. They had learned valuable information about how to fight these creatures, but the cost had been terrible. Of the 15 ships that had entered hegemony space, only 8 remained functional. "All ships," Sarah announced, "begin emergency repairs and prepare for hyperspace jump. We need to get this information back to Earth Command immediately." As the human fleet limped away from the devastated system, Dr. Martinez made one final discovery in the hegemony databanks. The void entities weren't just random destroyers. They were part of something larger. "Commander," Elena said, her voice filled with dread, "the hegemony files describe the void entities as scouts. The real invasion hasn't begun yet." The information she had decoded painted a picture of cosmic horror beyond imagination. The void entities were advanced forces for something called the Final Silence, a force that existed in spaces between universes, consuming entire realities. The journey back to Earth took 20 hours, with the human crews working frantically to repair their damaged ships and analyze the data they had gathered. When they finally reached human space, Admiral Webb was waiting with the largest fleet Earth had ever assembled, over 200 ships from every branch of the military. "Commander Chen," Admiral Webb said when the Valkyrie docked at the main station, "your report has changed everything. We're not just facing an invasion, we're fighting for the existence of reality itself." The data from the hegemony had revealed the true scope of the threat. The void entities were spreading across the galaxy, consuming star systems, and preparing the way for something even worse. Earth scientists worked around the clock to develop new weapons based on the information the human fleet had gathered. They built gravitational pulse cannons, quantum disruption fields, and exotic matter bombs. But everyone knew that conventional warfare might not be enough against an enemy that existed partially outside normal spacetime. News of the threat spread throughout the galactic community. For the first time in recorded history, every known species put aside their differences to face a common enemy. The peaceful Altarians provided their knowledge of dimensional physics. The warlike Draconians contributed their most advanced weapons technology. Even the mysterious Ethereals emerged from their hidden dimensions to offer assistance. But it was humanity that took the lead in organizing the defense. The other species had seen what the human fleet accomplished in hegemony space, how they had managed to damage entities that the mighty hegemony could barely touch. They wanted to understand what made humans different, what gave them the ability to fight the impossible. Dr. Martinez found the answer in humanity's evolutionary history. "We're the only species that evolved on a planet with regular extinction events," she explained to a gathering of alien scientists. "Every few million years, something tried to wipe us out. Asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, ice ages. We learned to survive when survival seemed impossible. This explanation fascinated the other species. They began to understand that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers, but their refusal to accept defeat. When faced with impossible odds, humans didn't surrender, they found new ways to fight. The combined galactic fleet that assembled to face the Void Swarm was unlike anything ever seen. Ships from hundreds of different species formed massive battle groups, their diverse technologies integrated into coordinated fighting units. At the center of it all were the human vessels, serving as the command and control centers for the unprecedented alliance. Admiral Webb stood on the bridge of the new flagship, Terra's Hope, looking out at the assembled armada. She had never imagined she would command such a force, but the situation demanded unity on a scale never before achieved. All fleet commanders, she announced over the Galactic communication network, the enemy is approaching the outer systems. This is our last chance to stop them before they reach the core worlds. The Void Swarm had grown since the encounter in hegemony space. Intelligence reports described a force of thousands of entities, each one capable of consuming an entire planet. Behind them came something even worse: distortions in space-time itself that suggested the arrival of the final silence. The first battle took place in the Rigel system, where the combined fleet made their initial stand against the advancing swarm. The Void entities had learned from their previous encounters with human forces. They no longer approached individually, but moved in coordinated formations that concentrated their reality-consuming effects. Entire sections of space became uninhabitable as the creatures drained the fundamental forces that held matter together. But the Galactic Alliance had learned as well. They used their combined knowledge to create weapons that could affect beings existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Altarian phase cannons disrupted the entity's connection to normal space. Draconian quantum torpedoes created localized reality storms that damaged the creature's exotic matter forms. The human contribution was tactical coordination and the willingness to make ultimate sacrifices. When conventional weapons failed, human crews would ram their ships into Void entities, using their vessels as delivery systems for exotic matter bombs. It was a tactic that horrified the other species, but proved devastatingly effective against the enemy. Captain Lisa Morrison commanded the destroyer Indomitable when a massive Void entity broke through the fleet's defensive lines. Her ship was badly damaged, but she saw an opportunity to strike at the creature's core. "All hands, abandon ship," she ordered. "I'm taking this thing with me." But her crew refused to leave. "With respect, Captain," said her first officer, "we're staying. If this is humanity's fight, then we fight it together." The Indomitable charged directly into the Void entity's center, its crew working together until the final moment to ensure their sacrifice would count. The explosion created a chain reaction that destroyed 3 other entities. The battle for the Rigel system lasted 6 hours and ended with the tactical withdrawal of the surviving Void entities. The Galactic fleet had won, but at enormous cost. Nearly a third of their ships had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Casualties numbered in the hundreds of thousands. "Status report," Admiral Webb requested after the immediate crisis had passed. The reports from across the fleet painted a grim picture. The Void entities were adapting faster than expected, developing countermeasures for every new weapon the Alliance deployed. Worse, the distortions in space-time were growing stronger, suggesting that the final silence was approaching ahead of schedule. "Admiral," Dr. Martinez reported from the science vessel Discovery, "I've been analyzing the quantum signatures from the Void entities. I think I know what the final silence actually is." Her research had revealed the true horror of what they were facing. The final silence wasn't just another enemy, it was the end of existence itself, a force that consumed entire universes by unmaking the physical laws that allowed matter and energy to exist. "The Void entities are preparing our reality for consumption," Elena explained to the fleet commanders. "They're weakening the barriers between dimensions, making it easier for the final silence to enter our universe." This revelation changed everything about their defensive strategy. They weren't just fighting to save their civilizations, they were fighting to preserve the basic structure of reality. If they failed, it wouldn't just mean death, it would mean that their universe would cease to have ever existed. The second major battle occurred in the Vega system, where the Galactic fleet attempted to prevent the void entities from establishing a permanent dimensional breach. The enemy had learned from the Rigel engagement and deployed new tactics that pushed the Alliance to its limits. The void creatures began merging together, creating super entities that could consume entire fleets. Commander Sarah Chen, now promoted to fleet captain, led a desperate assault on the largest of these merged entities. Her task force of 30 ships attacked the creature from multiple angles, using every weapon they possessed. But the entity adapted to each attack, growing stronger and more coherent as it absorbed the energy directed at it. "It's learning too fast," reported her tactical officer. "Every time we hit it, it becomes more resistant to that type of damage." Sarah realized they needed a completely different approach. "All ships, cease fire, prepare for coordinated quantum disruption." The plan was extremely dangerous, requiring perfect timing and complete trust between species that had been strangers months before. Every ship in the task force would fire their quantum disruptors simultaneously, creating a cascade effect that would hopefully tear the merged entity apart from the inside. The timing had to be perfect, a few milliseconds off, and the effect would fail completely. "All ships report ready," announced her communications officer. Sarah looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. They had been fighting this impossible war for months, losing friends and colleagues in every battle. But they hadn't given up. That was what made them human. "Fire!" she ordered. The combined quantum barrage struck the merged entity at exactly the same moment. The creature convulsed as contradictory physics equations tore through its exotic matter structure. For a moment it seemed to be working. The entity was breaking apart, its component void creatures separating and weakening. But then something went wrong. Instead of destroying the entity, the quantum disruption opened a rift in space-time itself. Through the rift came something that defied description, a fragment of the final silence itself. The bridge crew of every ship in the task force felt an overwhelming sense of wrongness as reality began to unravel around them. Matter started to dissolve at the quantum level, and the fundamental forces that held atoms together began to fail. "Emergency jump!" Sarah shouted. "All ships, emergency hyperspace jump, now!" The human fleet scattered in every direction, desperately trying to escape the expanding reality failure. Most of them made it to safety, but 3 ships were caught in the collapse and simply ceased to exist, erased from history as if they had never been built. The failure at Vega forced the Galactic Alliance to reconsider their entire strategy. Traditional military tactics were useless against an enemy that could manipulate the basic laws of physics. They needed something completely different, a way to fight beings that existed partially outside normal reality. The answer came from an unexpected source. The Hegemony Dreadnought's AI, which had survived its sacrifice by uploading itself to the human fleet's computers, provided the key insight. "You cannot defeat the final silence with force," it explained through Dr. Martinez's translation systems, "but you might be able to redirect it." The ancient AI revealed that the Hegemony had discovered a way to create stable dimensional barriers. These barriers couldn't destroy the void entities, but they could trap them in pocket dimensions where they couldn't affect normal space-time. The problem was that creating such barriers required enormous amounts of exotic matter and energy sources that the current Galactic Alliance simply didn't possess. Unless, the AI added, you are willing to sacrifice entire star systems to power the barriers. The proposal was staggering in its implications. To create dimensional barriers large enough to contain the final silence, they would need to deliberately detonate multiple stars, channeling the energy through specially constructed dimensional anchors. The process would destroy everything within several light years of each anchor point. Whoa. Admiral Webb called a council of war that included representatives from every species in the Alliance. The debate that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. They were discussing the deliberate destruction of entire solar systems to save the universe itself. "The math is clear," Dr. Martinez explained to the assembled leaders. "We need at least 12 dimensional anchors positioned around the advancing final silence. Each anchor requires the complete destruction of a star system to power it. We're talking about sacrificing 12 entire systems to save the rest of the galaxy." The representatives of the various species were horrified by the proposal. Most galactic civilizations were peaceful by nature, having evolved past the need for such extreme measures. But the humans understood what was being asked. They had evolved on a world where survival sometimes required terrible choices. "We'll do it," Admiral Webb announced. "Earth will provide the volunteers for the anchor missions." The other species were stunned by this immediate acceptance of what amounted to suicide missions. "You cannot be serious," protested the Altarian representative. "You're talking about deliberately destroying inhabited systems. The death toll would be in the billions." "The death toll of doing nothing would be infinite," Webb replied calmly. "The final silence will consume our entire universe. At least this way, something survives." The human willingness to make ultimate sacrifices galvanized the other species. If the Death Worlders were willing to volunteer for extinction to save everyone else, how could they refuse to help? One by one, the alien representatives agreed to the plan. They would evacuate the chosen systems and prepare the dimensional anchors. Construction of the anchors began immediately, with every available ship and construction facility devoted to the project. The devices were massive, each one the size of a small moon and requiring exotic materials from across the galaxy. Meanwhile, the void entities continued their advance toward the core systems, growing stronger and more numerous with each world they consumed. The first anchor was completed in the Altair system, which had been evacuated of all sentient life. Captain James Rodriguez volunteered to command the activation mission. Knowing it meant certain death, his ship, the heavy cruiser Prometheus, carried the activation codes and the quantum triggers needed to detonate the system's star. "This is Rodriguez to all ships," he announced as his vessel approached the dimensional anchor. "Beginning final approach. If this works, we'll have created the first barrier against the final silence. If it doesn't work, well, at least we tried something." The activation sequence required precise timing and positioning. Rodriguez had to guide his ship to the exact center of the anchor structure while simultaneously triggering the stellar detonation sequence. As the Prometheus reached the activation point, Rodriguez sent one final message. "Tell Earth that we did our duty. Tell them that humanity never backs down from a fight, no matter how impossible it seems." The star exploded in a carefully controlled detonation that channeled its energy through the dimensional anchor. A barrier formed in space-time itself, creating a stable wall that the void entities couldn't penetrate. The first anchor worked perfectly, proving that the plan was viable. But they needed 11 more, and the void entities were beginning to understand what the Galactic Alliance was attempting. The swarm changed its tactics, focusing attacks on the anchor construction sites. The battle for the second anchor in the Procyon system became a desperate race against time. Captain Sarah Chen commanded the defense of the construction site, while the engineers worked frantically to complete the massive device. Wave after wave of void entities attacked the human and alien ships protecting the anchor, each assault growing stronger as more creatures joined the swarm. "They know what we're doing," Chen reported to Admiral Webb. "They're throwing everything they have at this position." The defense of Procyon became a legend throughout the galaxy. Human ships formed a protective shell around the anchor construction site, absorbing attacks that should have destroyed them instantly. When their weapons failed, they rammed the void entities. When their ships were disabled, the crews continued fighting in spacesuits. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, commanding the Marine contingent aboard the anchor platform, led boarding actions against void entities that had somehow manifested physical forms. Fighting creatures of living void with conventional weapons should have been impossible, but the human Marines found ways to make it work. "These things bleed," Santos reported during one particularly fierce engagement. "I don't understand how, but they can be hurt by physical weapons if you hit them in the right spots." Her discovery led to the development of specialized anti-void ammunition that could damage the entities even in their incorporeal state. The second anchor was completed and activated just as the void entities launched their final assault on the position. Captain Rebecca Torres, Rodriguez's sister, volunteered for the activation mission. "He showed them how humans die," she announced. "Now I'll show them how humans live by making sure our sacrifices mean something." The Procyon detonation created the second dimensional barrier, and the pattern was established. Each anchor required the ultimate sacrifice from its activation crew. but each barrier brought them closer to containing the final silence. The process continued across the galaxy, with human volunteers stepping forward for each mission. By the time the 8th anchor was completed, something unexpected began to happen. The other species in the Alliance started volunteering for activation missions alongside the humans. The Draconian warrior captain Veltar requested command of the 9th anchor, declaring that his people would not let humanity bear the burden alone. "Humans have shown us what courage truly means," Veltar announced. "We will not be found wanting when the universe itself depends on our actions." The Altarian scientist Dr. Zenara volunteered for the 10th anchor, wanting to personally ensure that the dimensional calculations were perfect. Even the mysterious ethereals emerged from their hidden realms to assist with the final anchors. As the 12th and final dimensional anchor neared completion, the void entities made one last desperate attempt to stop the plan. The entire swarm converged on the construction site in the Sol system, Earth's own solar system. Admiral Webb had chosen humanity's home as the location for the final anchor, knowing that human crews would fight harder to defend their birth world than any other location. The battle for Earth was unlike anything in the planet's history. Thousands of void entities attacked the space around humanity's homeworld, while the largest dimensional anchor ever constructed was prepared for activation. Every human ship that could fly was pressed into service, from massive dreadnoughts to civilian transports hastily converted to warships. Commander Sarah Chen, now promoted to Admiral, coordinated the defense from the bridge of the new flagship Terra Invicta. Around her, the space near Earth filled with the wreckage of human and alien ships as they threw themselves against the advancing void entities. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen," she announced over the fleet communication system. "Behind us is Earth. Behind us is everything we've ever loved or cared about. The enemy thinks they can consume our universe, but they've never faced humans defending their home." The battle raged for 18 hours as engineers worked frantically to complete the final anchor. Earth's population watched from the surface as their skies filled with explosions and strange lights, as reality itself was torn and reformed by the fighting. When the final anchor was complete, Admiral Webb herself volunteered for the activation mission. "I'm not letting anyone else push the button that destroys our solar system," she announced. "This was my plan, so I'll see it through to the end." But her crew, and indeed the entire human fleet, refused to let her go alone. "With respect, Admiral," Admiral Chen announced, "if you're going down with the ship, we're all going down together. That's what it means to be human." Every surviving human vessel in the fleet moved into formation around the final dimensional anchor. They would activate it together, ensuring that the barrier would be perfect and permanent. As the human fleet approached the activation point, something miraculous happened. Ships from every species in the Galactic Alliance moved to join them. The Draconians, the Altarians, the Ethereals, and dozens of other races formed a massive formation around the anchor, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice together. "This is Admiral Webb to all ships," she announced. "We are about to activate the final dimensional barrier. When we do, the final silence will be trapped in the space between realities, unable to consume our universe. The cost has been terrible, but our sacrifice will save everything that has ever existed or ever will exist." The activation sequence began, and Earth's star began to collapse in a carefully controlled detonation. As the stellar energy was channeled through the dimensional anchor, barriers formed throughout space, connecting all 12 anchor points in a vast network that enclosed the advancing final silence. The void entities found themselves trapped in a pocket dimension, cut off from the normal universe they had been trying to consume. The final silence itself was caught in the barriers. Its reality-consuming hunger turned inward on itself. As the barriers solidified, the fleet that had made the final sacrifice began to fade from existence. But their last action was to send a message to the surviving forces scattered throughout the galaxy. "The barriers are stable. The universe is safe. Remember what we did here, and remember why we did it. This is humanity's gift to the galaxy, the knowledge that some things are worth any sacrifice." The aftermath of the final battle was felt throughout the galaxy. The void entities were gone, trapped in their pocket dimension prison. The final silence had been contained, unable to consume the universe it had coveted. But the cost had been staggering. Entire species had been reduced to scattered refugees, and hundreds of star systems had been destroyed. Earth was gone along with most of humanity's colonies. The species that had led the fight against the impossible had paid the ultimate price for victory. But humanity's sacrifice had shown the galaxy something that would never be forgotten. When faced with extinction, thinking beings could choose to fight rather than surrender. The survivors began the long process of rebuilding, but they did so with a new understanding of what courage meant. Monuments were built in every surviving system to honor the humans who had taught the galaxy that some enemies were worth dying to defeat. The dimensional barriers became known as humanity's wall, a permanent reminder of the species that had saved existence itself. Dr. Elena Martinez, one of the few humans to survive the final battle, found herself aboard a draconian rescue vessel 3 days after the barriers had been activated. She had been studying the quantum signatures of the dimensional anchors when the Sol system's star detonated, and her research ship had been far enough away to escape the controlled collapse. As she looked out at the space where Earth's solar system had once existed, Elena saw something that took her breath away. The dimensional barriers weren't just containing the final silence. They were creating something new. The exotic energies released by the 12 stellar detonations had formed a vast network of quantum filaments that stretched across the galaxy, creating what appeared to be a new form of hyperspace travel. "Dr. Martinez," called Captain Veltar from the bridge, "you need to see this. We're receiving transmissions from the barrier network." Elena hurried to the communications station, where impossible readings were displaying across the screens. The dimensional barriers were somehow broadcasting information, not just data, but consciousness itself. The voices that emerged from the quantum static were familiar. Admiral Webb, Admiral Chen, Captain Rodriguez, and thousands of other human voices were speaking through the barriers themselves. They had not simply died in the final battle, their consciousness had been integrated into the dimensional network, becoming permanent guardians of the universe they had saved. "Elena," came Admiral Webb's voice, clearer now than it had been in life. "We can see everything from here. Past, present, and future. The barriers aren't just walls, they're windows into the fundamental structure of reality itself. The revelation changed everything the survivors thought they knew about the sacrifice that had been made. The humans who had died activating the dimensional anchors had become something unprecedented, a collective consciousness that existed between dimensions, able to perceive and protect reality itself from threats that normal beings couldn't even detect. They were still human, but they had transcended the limitations of physical existence. Over the following months, the surviving species worked to understand what had happened and what it meant for the future of the galaxy. The dimensional barriers provided protection not just from the final silence, but from other reality-level threats that existed in the spaces between universes. The network had made their reality essentially invincible. But perhaps more importantly, the barriers had created new possibilities for exploration and growth. The quantum filaments connecting the anchor points allowed for instantaneous travel across galactic distances. Species that had been separated by vast distances could now communicate and trade as if they were neighbors. The few surviving humans found themselves in a unique position. They were the inheritors of their species' ultimate sacrifice, but also the living representatives of the consciousness network that protected the galaxy. Other species looked to them for guidance on how to honor the memory of those who had saved existence itself. Elena Martinez established the first Barrier Institute on New Altair, a research facility dedicated to studying the dimensional network and communicating with the consciousness that dwelled within it. Scientists from every surviving species came to learn how the barriers worked and what other secrets they might contain. "The network isn't just protecting us," Elena explained to a gathering of galactic leaders 6 months after the final battle. "It's teaching us. Every day we discover new applications for the technology, new ways to improve life for everyone in the galaxy. The barriers had become a source of infinite knowledge and possibility." But the most important discovery came when Elena managed to establish stable two-way communication with the human consciousness network. The conversation that followed would reshape galactic civilization forever. "Elena," Admiral Webb's voice came through clearly, "we need you to understand something important. This isn't the end of humanity, It's the beginning of something new. The Consciousness Network explained that they could guide the development of new technologies that would allow the remaining humans to eventually join them in the dimensional space between realities. It wouldn't be death, but transformation into something greater beings who could protect and nurture life throughout the universe. "We've seen what's coming," Admiral Chen's voice added. "Other universes, other realities that need protection from their own versions of the final silence. Humanity's role isn't finished. It's just beginning on a scale we never imagined." The revelation that there were other realities, other universes that might need protection, opened up possibilities that staggered the imagination. The surviving humans were given a choice. They could remain as they were, living normal lives and slowly rebuilding their species, or they could undergo the transformation process and join their fellows in the dimensional network. Most chose transformation, eager to reunite with loved ones and continue humanity's mission on a cosmic scale. Elena Martinez was among the last to make the choice. She had spent 2 years studying the barriers and communicating with the network, becoming the primary liaison between normal reality and the transcendent consciousness that protected it. When she finally stepped into the transformation chamber, she did so with complete understanding of what she was becoming. The process was unlike anything she had imagined. Instead of dying, she felt herself expanding, her consciousness merging with the vast network of human minds that had become one with the dimensional barriers. She could suddenly perceive reality from perspectives that spanned multiple universes, seeing the intricate patterns that connected all existence. But she was still Elena Martinez, still human, still driven by the same curiosity and compassion that had defined her species. The transformation hadn't erased their humanity, it had amplified it beyond all physical limitations. From their position in the dimensional network, the transcended humans could guide and protect life throughout the multiverse. Years passed, and the galaxy healed from the wounds inflicted by the Void Swarm. New civilizations emerged, many of them guided by subtle influences from the barrier network. The surviving species flourished under the protection of humanity's wall, developing technologies and philosophies that had never been possible before. The few humans who had chosen to remain in normal reality became something like priests or prophets, serving as intermediaries between their transcended species and the rest of the galaxy. They shared the wisdom of the network while remaining grounded in physical existence, ensuring that the lessons learned from humanity's sacrifice would never be forgotten. On the first anniversary of the final battle, representatives from every surviving species gathered at the memorial built where Earth's solar system had once existed. The ceremony was broadcast throughout the galaxy and even into other dimensions through the barrier network. It was a celebration not just of those who had died, but of what they had become. "Today we honor not just the humans who saved our universe," spoke the Altarian Prime Minister, "but the principle they embodied that some things are worth any sacrifice, and that even in the face of absolute impossibility, thinking beings can choose to fight rather than surrender." As the ceremony concluded, the barrier network pulsed with gentle light, and for just a moment, every being in the galaxy could feel the presence of the transcended humans watching over them. It was a reminder that they were not alone, that somewhere in the spaces between realities, humanity continued its eternal vigil. The story of the final battle spread throughout the galaxy and eventually to other realities through the dimensional network. Other universes facing their own impossible threats began to receive guidance and assistance from humanity's transcended consciousness. The species that had evolved on a single death world had become guardians of infinite realities. In the end, humanity had achieved something unprecedented in the history of existence. They had not just survived extinction, they had transformed it into transcendence. The final silence, which had sought to end all things, had instead become the catalyst for humanity's evolution into something beyond mortality, beyond physical limitation, beyond even death itself. The dimensional barriers continued to pulse with gentle light, carrying the consciousness of a species that had refused to surrender even when surrender seemed the only option. And in that light, the galaxy found hope for a future where no threat, no matter how impossible, could ever truly end the story of life itself. Humanity's fleet had responded to an SOS call, and found something greater than victory. They had found a way to transform ultimate sacrifice into eternal protection. The silence that followed their transcendence was not the silence of death, but the profound quiet of beings who had become one with the fundamental forces that protected all existence. And in that silence, the universe itself seemed to whisper, "Well done." The end.